Animation is my favorite medium of all time. I will never change that. I've been a fan of it since I was 1 year old, and many of my friends also enjoy animation. Me reviewing animation made me popular on the internet to the point that I was able to make money through it. There are many artistic merits to animation. Some of the greatest works of all time are animation. Some of my favorite pieces of media are also animation. There are a lot of good animators in the animation industry. It is filled with very talented people. However, in the past half a decade, there has been an increasing number of problems I have sadly noticed when it comes to people working in the animation industry. They say knowledge is power, and in order to win a fight, you first have to know what the fight is about. That is how you win. The more awareness that we spread on the past sins and mistakes can hopefully pave a better future for animation. You could say other mediums have had their troubles like literature, painting, music, film, live action, television, the internet, and especially video games, but they are at least all considered mediums by the general public. In this animation documentary, I will be going over innocent people that have been screwed over by corporations and networks. Sometimes it might just be on one person. Another episode could be on the whole company/network as a whole. This isn't meant to gain money. This is to gain awareness because I am tired of people getting screwed over in animation. If we want 2023 and onwards to not have people screwed over, then we must act now. But before we do a full act, we first are going to need all the knowledge that we can, so that way we know what we are fighting. I am going to be very harsh, strict to the point, and absolutely serious for this. This is Animation Absolutism. When you are facing down a gigantic beast or a part of a tragedy of your own hometown being destroyed, the first question that you ask when dealing with either of these situations is, where do I start? That's the main question that I had when doing this documentary. I had a hard time pondering on a good starting point, because the truth is I could have started anywhere in this series. I could complain about Netflix's current business models and why they went on a downward spiral with just a couple of decisions. YouTube's treatment towards animation, how they lied about jading animations to cover up their facade of burnout on creators. All the people that Nickelodeon have screwed over the years, how they had some controversial people. How a CEO of Cartoon Network one time attempted sex trafficking just so that a British actress could get a voice role. And how certain shows can't air anymore, or some people would go to jail due to tax evasion, or even the recent merger of Warner Bros. And Discovery, and how Discovery basically did a Thanos snap to 50% of Warner's properties. I could even talk about films in general, but a lot of these are long and complex and are very fearful. So let's start off easy. Walt Disney.
Good evening, friends.
And I'm talking about the person as a whole, not the company. That's a different episode entirely, and it would be too much to unpack here. We'll talk about Disney's buyouts, their support for China and Russia, and their LGBT issues another time. The biggest myth that some people believe is that people in animation have always been screwed over in the 21st century. The sad truth is that people have been screwed over in animation since the very beginning. Animation has been around since 1906. While Walt didn't invent the medium, he was one of the first people to be recognized in it. He was alive 5 years before it started. Walt was born in 1901 to Elias and Flora Disney and was the fourth child in his family, and they were a poor family living in Chicago. 4 years later, they moved to Marceline and stayed for about a couple years before moving to Kansas City, and Walt's father, Elias, wasn't exactly a supportive father. Yes, the more that things change, the more that they stay the same. Walt has been messed with since childhood, and when starting out in animation, even when he had it made, things would go south for him. If you think animators are screwed nowadays, Walt himself might have been the one most screwed of them all. At least animators nowadays could at least say that they have a happier life outside of animation. Walt could not say that, at least in his childhood. Walt's father owned a newspaper route, and instead of having employees, he made his own kids, Roy and Walt, do the deliveries when they were about 10 or so, and it was rough. Poor shoes, treading through snow, and Walt has stated he passed out several times on doorsteps while doing the deliveries. Yes, in today's world, this would be classified as child abuse. Due to different laws back then, it would sadly not be. On top of that, that was the morning route. After that was school, and Walt was hardly awake for his classes. And then he had to do the route again for the evening paper.
Winter, we'd go out at 3:30 in the morning right after a blizzard or in a blizzard or in pouring rain. It didn't matter. I did that for 6 years. It was tough.
And if he's late or made any mistakes, Elias would beat him with a belt. Even before then, Walt's dad still would beat him. There's one infamous story that while Walt and his family were still living at the barn, he and his little sister, Ruth, got covered in tar and painted themselves on the barn, assuming it would come off. It didn't, so Walt got another belting. Even during other times after dinner, Elias would call Walt into another room for a serious talk and would bell him. It wasn't just Walt, he also hit his other kids with a switch if they misbehaved. Yeah, that joke in Pinocchio of that mom slapping her son's ass was sadly a near accurate representation of Walt's dad beating up Walt. And Walt's dad wasn't that big on the idea of him becoming an artist. Even though Walt managed to sell a few pieces to others and even traded cartoons for free haircuts, his dad eventually supported him by letting him attend the Chicago Art Institute when he got older, but still, the scars are still there. I know it was the old days and Walt loved his father, but Walt deserved better. And it was a contract that was the next major rock on Walt's road. After serving as an ambulance driver in World War I, Walt entered adulthood. He tried to open a company, but that didn't pan out so well. In fact, it went bankrupt. But it was here when he met his close friend, UB Iwerks. He tried again with one called Lavograms, an animation company. The same thing happened. While the animations were popular, they were not profitable. Walt then moved to California and with his brother Roy, made the Disney Brothers Studios, with Universal as a distributor. Yes, at one point in time, Universal owned Walt Disney. Keep that in mind. Together, Walt and UB made cartoons such as the Alice comedy series, but the most famous and popular of all was Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. The business was a success. However, Universal Studios, through a contract loophole, had control of the Oswald trademark and took all of Disney's animators except for Iwerks. And yes, it's that Universal you're thinking of, the one that has millions of films and shows. Been a thing since the 1920s, and they took away Oswald from Walt. This was Walt's biggest blow at the time. He became successful and found out he didn't own what he created. So yeah, if you think copyright is a bitch nowadays, it was a bitch since the beginning. That's because when you sign up for a network, you give up your own copyright, even back then. And it doesn't even matter what medium it is. If you want to know why Disney as a company is so hostile when it comes to copyright, especially towards Mickey, well, you just gotta look at the man himself that was screwed over by Charles Mintz. Charles Mintz offered Walt a chance to continue working on Oswald, but it's for a contract that would give Walt even less pay. Walt was heartbroken and soon enough left Universal after finishing the last 3 Oswald cartoons. Imagine if you would lose your own children because they were popular but weren't profitable. It's basically the same feeling that Walt had. On a train ride back to California, Walt came up with a character named More Mouse. But his wife, Lillian, suggested the name Mickey because it had a better ring to it. Once back in California, UB Iwerks created and finalized the design, and Mickey Mouse was born.
He popped out of my mind onto a drawing pad on a train ride from Manhattan to Hollywood at a time when the business fortunes of my brother Roy and myself were at lowest ebb and disaster seemed right around the corner.
So Mickey was an instant hit, right? Well, no, it didn't start like that. Disney lived off eating beans whilst racking up debts and supposedly had a breakdown after creating Mickey Mouse. Over at least 300 bankers and finances rejected Mickey, not believing in the profit Mickey could make. Even after finally getting accepted, Mickey had 2 cartoons that weren't huge. Ask anyone what the first Mickey cartoon was. They would say Steamboat Willie. It's the first cartoon with synchronized sound. Well, Mickey had 2 cartoons before that, those being Plain Crazy and The Galloping Gaucho, which are both silent films, believe it or not, like Felix the Cat and Oswald. And keep in mind, we are just getting started here. Steamboat Willie became a hit for making synchronized sound cartoons, allowing him to make more cartoons, and soon add colors to the mix, such as the Silly Symphony, flowers, and trees. And who can forget that iconic cartoon of the 3 Little Pigs? But one day, Walt wanted to go bigger. He called up his best artists and story writers to meet him at the studio with some dinner, and Walt acted out the story of Snow White.
I have the heavy.
It's a magic wishing apple.
And told him that this was their next project, a Snow White cartoon that's a feature-length movie. This was practically unheard of at the time. Cartoons at the time could have been 5 or 10 minutes at most. They were animated shorts. Movies back then and now are 2 hours long at most. His studio was ready to give it a try, but the world wasn't. Everyone in Hollywood considered the studio and Walt himself as a joke, because movies can't give off drama. They can make you laugh and cry. They are high art, while cartoons would, and I quote, make your eyes bleed for being too colorful. They are silly and only meant for comedy, and they are just childish. They can't be serious or make you cry. It's the most common thing we hear today. 1 century later, and we still hear this. That animations are technicolor nonsense meant for kids and a lot of nothing. If you wonder why people still treat animation like it's a childish thing, Hollywood has been doing it since the 20s.
people in the business thought, he's got to be out of his mind. So it became known as Disney's Folly.
We were told by all the big movie moguls in Hollywood that people just wouldn't sit still for an hour and a half of cartoons because the bright colors would hurt your eyes. Everybody get up and walk out of there. And other people said, you're going to have gags all the way and people get tired of it. Well, Walt was a better storyteller in that he realized you had to have the pathos, the love scene, and the gags and the chase and all of the regular things that make a good picture.
Now, the production of Snow White was everyone given their A game. New state-of-the-art technology for camera movements, rotoscoping, a ton of musical numbers, and much more. But it was stressful. Walt had at least 1 or 2 mental breakdowns during productions. But luckily, he did take a mental health vacation with his wife. But the cost of this whole film was a stress on Walt. He didn't want to give any previews out until the film was finished, but he had to give Banks test demos reels of the film. And on top of that, Walt Disney had to sell his car and his fucking house to finance the damn film.
In fact, the banker, I think, was losing more sleep than I was.
Let's think about this for a minute. His own house and car was sold to finance at the time, one-of-a-kind film, literally a brand new medium chance to the landscape of film. This had better be a good movie. Keep in mind, this film cost around $1 million to make, which in today's world would be $20.5 million. Luckily for Walt, it was. On the premiere of Snow White, all of the Disney staff and Walt was ready to show the world what they got. All of the biggest names in Hollywood at the time were there, aka Hollywood royalty, which includes Shirley Temple, Charlie Chaplin, Marlene Dietrich, Douglas Fairbanks Jr., and Helen Vincent, just to name a few. It wasn't just any normal premiere. They even had character meet and greets for Mickey, Minnie, the dwarves, someone to play the prince, and Snow White to sing songs with an orchestra. It was almost like a festival. Again, this film had to be worth it in order to earn back all that money and get animation respected. The most that cartoons could do at the time was to make people laugh and smile. If animation was to be taken seriously, it should make you happy, but also make you scared or even sad, get an attachment to the characters. Walt sat in that theater with a steady breath as the lights dim, and the projector screen came to life with the story that he and his workers crafted. The audience laughed at the dwarves' silly nature. They enjoyed Snow White singing. But then came the deal breaker, Snow White's death. When Snow White ate the poison apple and fell into death like sleep, Walt watched but listened, and he heard a noise from the audience that would change filmmaking forever. He heard crying from the guests as the dwarves grieved over the fallen princess, and when the prince came in to bestow a kiss on her, waking her up, the audience was roaring with joy. When the audience cried, Walt knew that he and his crew hit it right. Many people treated the production as a joke, probably went to see the movie even as a joke, much like how people today go off to see really bad movies. They said Snow White would be Walt's folly, but soon Hollywood said it was Disney's triumph. After its premiere, it came to more and more theaters all across the nation, and there were similar reactions. Audible laughs and gasps throughout the screening. Everyone loved the characters, the impressive animation. The average American to the film critics had nothing but glowing praises for the film. Even film legend Charlie Chaplin, that movie to him, exceeded his expectations, and he was particularly fond of Dopey. You're probably thinking, this sounds great. Everyone loves Disney now. There should be any more problems for Walt, right? Oh, that couldn't be more wrong. Walt made a lot of money from Snow White. And what do you do when you earn a lot? Well, of course, Walt used the majority for the pay of his employees. He moved the studio to an even bigger location in Burbank, California, one that has a gym and such, and used the money to fund the next project, Pinocchio. If you ask any kid what they would do with a lot of money, the ideal dream for a kid would be to buy a lot of candy or toys. Back in the day, it was the dream to buy a nice house for your parents. Walt and Roy did just that. The brothers got their parents a nice house near Burbank, California. It was nice, but there was a small problem. The heating system used natural gas. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that it was leaking. Walt hired a couple of people to go and fix the bulky system. It was supposed to be fixed, but it sadly wasn't done correctly. November of 1938, Elias Disney was grasping for air as he found Flora Disney unconscious. They were quickly rushed to a hospital. Elias Disney survived but became terminally ill. Flora didn't survive. Walt took the death of his mother pretty hard, like a lot of people would, but he took it personally. He felt responsible for his own mother's death. He bought the house and felt like he's the one who caused this. Well, if you're listening to this somehow, just because you bought the house doesn't mean you caused the gas to leak. Walt took a day off to attend her funeral, but went straight back to work, trying to distract himself from his grief. If you are wondering why so many stories from the Disney canon have no parents, namely a mom who passed away, this is why. While a dead parent is a common thing in fairy tales and folklore, and many of these stories have an element of coming of age, while Walt was alive, it was believed it was because it was Walt's way of dealing with his grief. Sleeping Beauty was the only canon film with both parents alive when Walt was alive, and technically 101 Dalmatians. Pinocchio and Fantasia were the next films to be created, but sadly neither did too good at the box office. Eventually they got more love and respect for being charming, funny, scary, or artistic over time, but at the time they weren't doing well. Luckily for him, Dumbo was their next big hit, but sadly the country was soon dealing with a new problem. World War II, and Disney entered the cause by the army funding them to make propaganda and wartime cartoons, showing Donald Duck having a nightmare what it's like to be a Nazi, why you should recycle grease more properly for the war effort, etc. Because of this, Disney, when it came time for their actual films, they were package films. They didn't exactly have the funds for a proper full-length feature, so they made a bunch of short films and packaged them into one film, like what Fantasia was. One of them was Saludos Amigos, which was meant to be a film that helped show goodwill towards Latin America and increase allyship in the war effort, and its sequels, The Three Caballeros, add to it. Those films were some of the earliest examples of a blend of live-action and animation for a feature film. Now, you hear a lot of people say, keep politics out of cartoons, which is fair, but keeping political things out of animation creators was another thing. Walt was as American as can be, but he was politically naive. He would do anything to keep his country safe or happy, but he was naive on the matter. Walt's staff tried to form a union. The fraternal/family feeling of the company was fading. One of his staff members whispered in his ears and told him several of his staff who tried to form a union were communists. Walt quickly believed that notion, fell right into the dumb beliefs. He was one of the main people who believed the Red Scare and helped create the Hollywood blacklist, which is what it sounds like. Blacklisting people from Hollywood because they were afraid they were communists. What Walt and all those other people who created that blacklist were wrong, what he and the others did was incredibly dumb. But this goes to show you is that you shouldn't be so naive with anything. News, politics, etc. You shouldn't blindly believe something even if things are going wrong in your life. Really think about it, get the facts straight. Now, post-World War and Red Scare aside, Walt did do pretty well publicly with more films. Disney wasn't just animation anymore. Walt loved animals and he made several nature documentaries such as True to Life and Seal Island. And he made plenty of live-action films such as So Dear to My Heart, Treasure Island, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and even a live-action animation hybrid by the name Song of the South, which won an Oscar because of James Baskett's incredible performance of Uncle Remus singing Zippity Doo Dah, making him the first African-American actor to ever. They were working on Cinderella, which was their first full film in the longest time. Shortly after was Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan, but Walt wasn't too focused on Cinderella, but he needed it to be successful, and the reasons why are unique. Disney, after the war, needed a big success. The package films were serviceable, but weren't making a lot of money back, like what Dumbo or Bambi did, and they needed Cinderella to earn a lot back, to help fund Walt's newest project. Walt, at the time, had less involvement in the animation department and was more focused on live action. But even still, Walt's biggest dream now wasn't on the gold screen. It was elsewhere in California. Not in a dark cinema room, but the Orange Groves.
Well, it came about when my daughters were very young, and Saturday was always Daddy's Day with the two daughters. So we'd start out and try to go someplace with, different things, and I would take them to the merry-go-round, and I took them different places, and as I'd sit there while they rode the merry-go-round, did all these things, I felt that there should be something built, some kind of an amusement enterprise built where the parents and the children could have fun together. So that's how Disneyland started.
Disneyland was born from that idea, but such an idea cost a lot of money. And as stated prior, the company was only doing okay at the time. Cinderella was thankfully a big hit, earning over $8 million back at the box office, which helped fund Disney's creation. But just like everything stated so far, whenever Walt wants to create something brand new, it's expensive and just gives him more things to worry about. The whole construction was less than a year and it was just stressful. I won't go too heavy into detail here because plenty of other channels done this, like That Jerk with a Camera, Address Unknown, Offhand Disney, and several others. But imagine running a studio with 3 different beaches for film, and now construction a theme park, and all eyes and ears of the world are judging you now because you are established with good content. How long before you screw up? How did Walt get any sleep through this? Luckily for Walt, ABC did help fund Disneyland's creation. They asked Walt to be the host of his own anthology series called Disneyland and the Wonderful World of Color, which would be a weekly show to show off Disneyland's progress, give updates and previews of upcoming films, show off educational topics such as color or math, even show the behind the scenes of making film or TV. It was a win-win for everyone. Was press day good? Nope, it was reportedly a mess. Eventually everything worked out okay, but that day at Disney was known to be very crowded, mostly due to the fact that plenty of people tried to use count for tickets, when in actuality, most if not all real tickets were sent out via invite only. Only 11,000 people were expected to show off, but by midday afternoon, over 28,000 ticket holders were heading for the Disneyland, causing unprecedented traffic jams. Also, it's Southern California, and the heat wave happening was relentless. Rides still needed fine-tuning, and due to overcrowding, food and drinks were out pretty fast. And you want to know the craziest thing of all? Because of the broadcast, Dateline Disneyland, which he was in, he wasn't aware of any of this stuff happening till a day after. Walt and his staff acted immediately and fixed up the rides, made more proper safety precautions for the crowd flow, got the food and drink situation sorted out, and privately invited the press again for a round 2 to give them the more proper experience that they should have had, which did work out fine. A very good save, but that must have been insane. Disneyland opened publicly by July 18, 1955. The next 10 years were full of ups and downs and all arounds. Lady and the Tramp, Sleeping Beauty, and Sword in the Stone, the changes to the parks over time, new live-action films such as Old Yeller, Pollyanna, Babes in Toyland, Swiss Family Robinson, that last film became an attraction at the park, and of course, the TV shows such as Davy Crockett, Zorro, Mickey Mouse Club, and the Anthology series. And of course, 1964 rolled by. Mary Poppins finally premiered. That film was based on the books written by P.L. Travers, and she and Walt had a hard time agreeing on anything for the film, such as the casting, how scenes would play out, P.L. Travers not liking the idea of animation or musical numbers in the film, although Walt believed those can work. Walt did do something crummy which was not inviting her to the premiere, but this is just another problem we had in the animation field. Yes, it was a live-action film, but it had a massive animated segment, and it applies to both live-action and animation. The problem is finding the middle ground. P.L. Travers was very difficult during production. Walt had his own vision for the film, as did she. And yes, what Walt did, not inviting her, was a bit of a jerk move. But this is why you have to try to put the egos aside and find a way to make both parties happy. Also, 1964 was the New York World's Fair, which created 4 new attractions, and those were huge priorities in Walt's mind. The Magic Skyway, Carousel of Progress, Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, and the last one is made on a horrifying crunch time. It's a small world. Yep, crunch time. We will talk about crunch time more in future episodes, but keep in mind how much stress this adds. Walt's mind, despite all the projects piling up, money he needs to earn and other stresses in his life, he couldn't stop dreaming. He wanted to create another Disneyland, or rather a world, in Florida, with its own Magic King and experimental prototype community of tomorrow. But sadly, this is the biggest blow that Walt has ever faced: his own health. Walt was a smoker. He only did it in private and never in public, but he was a smoker. He used to voice Mickey Mouse, but had to stop because his voice wasn't going to be good for it anymore because of his habit.
Hang on, pal. Here we go.
His health was deteriorating over time. On November 2nd, 1966, during pre-operative x-rays for upcoming surgery for an old polo injury to Walt Disney's neck, doctors at St. Joseph Medical Center discovered a malignant cancerous tumor that had spread to his entire left lung. After removal of the lung on November 7th, doctors informed Walt's wife and daughters that his life expectancy was 6 months to 2 years. After 2 weeks of chemotherapy sessions, Walt was released from the hospital and returned to his studio to do some limited work. On November 30th, he collapsed in his own home. He was quickly rushed to the hospital. December 14th, his brother Roy came to visit. Walt was pointing to the ceiling, still thinking of the layout for Epcot. He then signaled Roy about the roads and major places at Epcot and Disney World. His mind was clear, active, and vibrant, despite being on death's door. His older brother was by his side. They both knew it was the end. 9:35 a.m., December 15th, 1966. Having just celebrated his 65th birthday 2 weeks earlier, Walt Disney was gone. The whole world was in shock. His family, his fans, the company, everyone grieves the loss of a man who has given everyone an opportunity to think outside the box, or given them a reason to smile, find a way to be positive. But what do you do when the man who has given you all that hope is gone? What will happen to his family, to the company? Will the park survive? Will the Florida project even be done at all? Will the anime films be done? Can they even make the new content without the leader? Who would keep this flame alive?
Walt Disney World is a tribute to the philosophy and the life of Walter Elias Disney, and to the talents, the dedication, and the loyalty of the entire Disney organization that made Walt Disney's dream come true. May Walt Disney World bring joy and inspiration and new knowledge to all who come to this happy place. A magic kingdom where the young at heart of all ages can laugh and play and learn together. Dedicated this 25th day of October, 1971.
Roy, still an ever-loving older brother, got the finest Imagineers and went ahead and built the Magic Kingdom. They built Disney World, and Roy changed the name to Walt Disney World, so everyone knows the park was Walt's dream. The other anime films were completed, but they were only so many films Walt was in the middle of, or gave the approval of before his death. After Walt's death, the company suffered. While he died in 1966, it was the 1970s when Walt Disney as a whole took a hit. There's a reason why people consider the 1970s the worst decade in animation. The company asked themselves the question, what would Walt Disney do? This is why films like The Black Cauldron ended up getting a PG rating and not PG-13 like originally planned. Even after death, Walt was given a lot of crap. People accused him of being a racist and anti-Semitic. However, all these claims have been discarded by various people who worked with Walt, including animation legend Floyd Norman. Even people deny his death, claiming he is chronologically frozen underneath the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. This isn't true. His body was cremated. The ashes of Walt were interred in the Disney Family Garden in the Court of Freedom section of Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California. Even now, and this is a rumor, so take it with a grain of salt, people are saying that in the wake of woke culture, Walt's name might be removed from the Walt Disney World signage and possibly the Disney company as a whole. Given everything we discussed here that is disgustingly insulting, considering all that he has been through and all that he has done for the company and the world, Walt was a lot of things. A medic in World War I, a businessman, a husband and father, a theme park creator. But don't forget, he was an animator. An animator who worked himself to the point of a mental breakdown and exhaustion. And while he did enjoy his life, he went through a lot more than most people did. But despite all of that, Walt kept moving forward, found silver linings, made things work, no matter how bleak the world was or impossible a goal seemed. In the end, even though he could have done much more if given a longer life, he lived a life he could be proud of. It wasn't perfect, but he did what he knew best. Keep moving forward. Much of what we saw in Walt's life will echo for decades to come, and what we will see in future episodes. The crunch time, all those contracts, having to deal with abuse, not being taken seriously because of animation, and so much more. We dealt with a lot here. Animators nowadays may not get that much abuse, considering these days most people are standing up for themselves, union laws and social media support, etc. But abuse has become the actual norm. On every contract for when you join an animation company, it should say, we have the right to fuck you over in any way that we want, for any reason, at any time, and any day. However, that's not solely animation. Film, business, sports, etc. But those are more commonly recognized. Animation isn't. Here we are, shining the light on animation's bumpy road. The next of these 7 episodes are going to be darker. This is only the tip of the iceberg of animation abuse.
I hope you enjoy the show, and incidentally, have a handkerchief handy. If you're like me, you're not only going to laugh a lot, but you're going to shed a few happy tears. So thanks for coming, and again, I'm sorry I can't be there with you personally for this occasion, but here now is